The thunderous roar of jet engines echoed across Davis-Monthan Air Force Base as the Arizona sun blazed mercilessly overhead, turning the tarmac into a shimmering ocean of heat that could melt boot soles and test the resolve of even the most seasoned aircrew. Captain Sarah Chen wiped perspiration from her brow as she completed her pre-flight inspection of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, her maintenance clipboard damp with sweat despite the early morning hour. The distinctive twin-engine attack aircraft sat like a sleeping predator on the flight line, its distinctive nose-mounted GAU-8 Avenger cannon and armored cockpit speaking to its singular purpose as the military's premier close air support platform. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Around her, the controlled chaos of flight operations unfolded with practiced precision. Ground crews scurried between aircraft, fuel trucks rumbled across the concrete, and the sharp voices of crew chiefs who understood that careless mistakes on the ground became fatal errors in the air carried across the din. Sarah worked methodically through her inspection checklist, her movements efficient and deliberate as she examined hydraulic lines, checked control surfaces, and verified weapons systems, with the obsessive attention to detail that separated competent pilots from dead ones. Her flight suit bore the subdued patches of the 354th Fighter Squadron, though the name tape across her chest read simply Chen S, followed by her pilot wings. It was a set of credentials that made her nearly invisible to the combat pilots who strutted across the base with the swagger that came from flying actual missions in contested airspace. She was just another maintenance test pilot, someone whose job was to ensure aircraft were properly configured before being handed over to the real warriors who would take them into harm's way. For the better part of 2 hours, she had been conducting post-maintenance verification flights, taking aircraft through their paces to ensure that repairs and upgrades had been completed correctly. Her logbook showed hundreds of these routine test flights, each one a careful exercise in pushing aircraft systems to their limits without crossing the line into actual combat operations. The work required skill and precision, but it was the kind of flying that never appeared in war stories or earned recognition beyond the grudging acknowledgement that someone had to do the boring stuff. The group of combat pilots lounging in the shade of the operations building might as well have been looking through her as she went about her methodical inspection routine. They carried themselves with the lean confidence that came from surviving actual combat missions, combined with the casual dismissiveness of veterans who had earned their stripes in places where surface-to-air missiles and enemy fighters turned mistakes into obituaries. Lieutenant Jake Morrison stretched his legs in the shade, his flight suit decorated with patches that told stories of deployments to places that appeared on classified maps. "Jesus, they've got test pilots doing combat aircraft prep now," he said, loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability about whether the comment was meant to be overheard. His wingman, Captain Rick Delacroix, a stocky Louisianan with the kind of drawl that made everything sound like a casual observation, squinted in Sarah's direction with theatrical confusion. "That's not a test pilot," he added with a grin that spoke of men entertaining themselves at someone else's expense. "That's someone playing airplane mechanic. Look at how she's checking those wing pylons like she's never seen ordnance before." The laughter that followed carried the particular edge of combat veterans who had learned to find humor in situations that civilians would consider deadly serious. Each joke needed to escalate slightly beyond the last to maintain the same level of amusement, a competition in wit that served as both entertainment and a way of processing the psychological stress that came with flying missions where people tried to kill you. Sarah kept her attention focused on the aircraft inspection, though she wasn't deaf to the commentary drifting across the flight line. She had heard worse from better pilots, and the maintenance verification she was conducting required her complete concentration. A single overlooked discrepancy could result in catastrophic failure during flight operations, turning routine test flights into smoking craters and casualty reports. $20 says she's never been closer to combat than a flight simulator, Morrison continued his running commentary. Probably thinks the GAU-8 is just for show, like some kind of aviation decoration. Nah, Delacroix countered with the confidence of someone who thought he could read people like technical manuals. Look at those pristine flight gloves. Definitely fresh out of pilot training. Probably thinks close air support means flying low enough to wave at ground troops. As she worked, Sarah noticed details that the observing pilots had missed. Morrison's aircraft showed stress fractures around the landing gear attachment points that suggested someone had been pulling harder G-forces than recommended for training flights. Delacroix's A-10 had cannon bore scoring that indicated recent live-fire exercises, but the ammunition bay showed signs of improper loading procedures that could cause feeding malfunctions during actual combat engagements. She also observed that neither pilot had bothered to review the updated tactical threat assessments that had been distributed during the morning briefing. The regional security situation had evolved significantly over the past week, with new surface-to-air missile systems being deployed by hostile forces in areas where training flights regularly operated. But reviewing such intelligence wasn't her responsibility. She was here to verify aircraft systems, nothing more. Colonel Marcus Webb emerged from the operations building with the measured stride of someone who had learned that commanding presence was more effective than raised voices. Mid-40s, regulation haircut that had gone gray at the temples, sleeves rolled to display qualification badges earned in conflicts that had shaped modern military aviation doctrine. He carried a mission briefing folder like it contained the secrets of successful air warfare. He took one look at Sarah's methodical inspection routine and made a visible effort to appear patient with what he clearly viewed as an unnecessary delay in his flight schedule. "Captain Chen, how much longer for the post-maintenance verification?" Sarah didn't pause in her examination of the aircraft's defensive systems as she responded. "Colonel, the maintenance order specified complete systems verification. I'm working through the checklist as written." She indicated a thick manual that lay open beside her toolkit, official documentation that outlined every step required for proper aircraft certification. Webb's expression tightened slightly, though he couldn't argue with adherence to written procedures that existed specifically to prevent the kind of mechanical failures that turned routine flights into investigations and memorial services. Instead, he found a different angle of approach. "Just remember that some of us have actual mission requirements to meet today. Try not to get too caught up in the paperwork side of aviation." The comment drew knowing chuckles from his audience of combat pilots, though the humor felt increasingly forced as the morning wore on. Sarah finished her inspection and moved to the next aircraft on her verification list, an A-10 that someone had clearly been pushing beyond normal operational parameters. The engines showed signs of over-temperature operation, the flight controls had stress indicators that suggested aggressive maneuvering, and the weapons systems bore evidence of recent live-fire training that hadn't been properly documented. She began her systematic examination with the same methodical patience she applied to every aircraft, cleaning and adjusting components with movements that were precise without being showy. There was something almost meditative about her inspection process, a rhythm that suggested muscle memory developed through countless repetitions under various conditions. From across the flight line, Major Lisa Rodriguez watched the entire exchange through the window of the Squadron Operations Center. A veteran F-16 pilot who had transitioned to administrative duties after accumulating enough combat hours to qualify for astronaut training, she had the kind of weathered perspective that came from spending years in cockpits where split-second decisions determined who went home and who became statistics. She had been observing flight operations all morning, but something about the test pilot conducting aircraft verifications had caught her attention. It wasn't her tools, though they were obviously better maintained than standard-issue equipment. It wasn't her inspection technique, though she worked with obvious competence that spoke of extensive experience. It was something in the way she moved around the aircraft, the economy of motion, the absolute certainty in her hand placement as she checked systems, the way she never had to look twice to find components or controls. Rodriguez had seen that kind of familiarity before, in pilots who had spent so much time in specific aircraft types, that the machines became extensions of their own bodies. She had also been listening to the casual commentary from the younger combat pilots, and it was beginning to grate against her professional sensibilities. She had flown enough different missions to recognize real competence when she saw it, and she had learned through hard experience that the people you underestimated were usually the ones who ended up saving your life when circumstances went sideways. "Morrison," she called through the operations center window, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made junior officers suddenly pay attention. "When's the last time you reviewed current threat assessments for this operational area?" Morrison looked confused by the seemingly random question. "Yesterday morning, Major." During the standard briefing. "Yesterday's briefing covered last week's intelligence. I'm asking about current threat assessments. The ones that were updated this morning based on overnight reconnaissance." Morrison approached the operations window with the reluctant posture of someone who suspected he was about to be educated about something he should have already known. Rodriguez handed him a classified folder containing satellite imagery and intelligence summaries that had arrived during the pre-dawn hours. That maintenance test pilot has been reviewing updated threat data while conducting her aircraft inspections, Rodriguez said quietly, her voice carrying across the immediate area. Current enemy positions, recent surface-to-air missile deployments, updated rules of engagement. She's been treating routine verification flights like potential combat missions. The casual laughter from the gathered pilots died down considerably. Nothing killed military humor faster than discovering that someone you had been dismissing was actually more prepared than you were for the realities of their shared profession. The morning continued with the usual rhythm of military aviation operations. Brief periods of intense activity punctuated by longer stretches of waiting, planning, and equipment preparation designed to ensure that when aircraft finally launched, every possible variable had been accounted for, and contingency plans existed for situations that hopefully would never arise. Sarah continued her methodical work, invisible to most observers, but drawing increasingly curious glances from the few personnel who possessed enough experience to recognize precision and preparation when they witnessed it. Around midday, when the desert heat had reached that shimmering intensity that made distant mountains dance like mirages, Colonel Webb decided to provide some entertainment for his combat pilots while simultaneously addressing what he viewed as an inefficient use of maintenance resources. "You know what?" he announced loudly enough to carry across the flight line operations area. "Why don't we see what our test pilot can do with all that careful inspection work she's been conducting on combat aircraft?" Several heads turned, sensing an opportunity for amusement at the expense of someone whose job they viewed as fundamentally supportive rather than operationally relevant. This was the moment Sarah had been hoping to avoid since she had first heard the dismissive comments about her maintenance verification procedures. She looked up from the weapon systems diagnostics she had been running on an A-10's GAU-8 cannon, her expression carefully neutral and professional. "Colonel, I'm here to verify aircraft systems functionality, not to demonstrate combat capabilities." "Come on, Chen," Webb pressed, warming to his theme with the confidence of someone who believed he was creating a valuable teaching moment. "All that meticulous systems analysis work. Don't you want to see if your aircraft actually performs the way the technical manuals claim it should?" Someone from the back of the gathering crowd called out, "Give her something easy. Wouldn't want her to get overwhelmed by actual combat systems." More laughter followed, though it was beginning to sound hollow in the oppressive desert heat. Sarah set down her diagnostic equipment and considered the request with the same careful attention she had been applying to aircraft systems all morning. No anger, no offense taken, just professional evaluation of a situation that had taken an unexpected turn in a direction she had hoped to avoid. The trap was being prepared, and she recognized it clearly. But sometimes, Sarah had learned through hard experience, the best way to handle a trap was to spring it deliberately and deal with the consequences on your own terms, rather than allowing others to control the timing and circumstances. "What exactly did you have in mind, Colonel?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough professional curiosity to keep the situation interesting without appearing eager for confrontation. Webb's grin widened as he gestured toward the A-10 she had just finished, inspecting and certifying for flight operations. "Let's see what you can do with that aircraft in an actual close air support scenario. Nothing too complicated. Just demonstrate that all your careful systems verification actually translates into operational capability." The suggestion drew more attention from personnel across the flight line. Other pilots and ground crew drifted over, drawn by the prospect of watching a maintenance test pilot attempt to handle real combat scenarios in an aircraft designed specifically for close air support missions in contested environments. The A-10 was no civilian aircraft. It was a purpose-built tank killer with a 30mm cannon that could destroy armored vehicles at ranges that most pilots never attempted. Sarah walked over to where the aircraft sat on its main landing gear, studying it with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was reading details that others had missed. The weight of expectation from every observer on the flight line pressed against her shoulders like physical force. But she had felt that kind of attention before under circumstances where failure meant considerably more than professional embarrassment. The difference was that in previous situations, missing targets hadn't just meant personal humiliation. It had meant ground troops died while waiting for close air support that never arrived effectively. She approached the A-10 not tentatively like someone handling unfamiliar equipment, but with the casual confidence of someone who had spent countless hours in similar cockpits under conditions that most people couldn't imagine. The aircraft settled around her like it belonged there as she began the startup procedures with practiced efficiency. Rodriguez, still observing from the operations center, felt something click in her memory as she watched Sarah's pre-flight routine. The way she adjusted the seat and controls, the automatic verification of defensive systems, the finger discipline that never allowed careless contact with critical switches until she was ready to use them. These weren't learned responses from flight school or training programs. They were hardwired reflexes burned into muscle memory through repetition under pressure, the kind of automatic behaviors that kept pilots alive when conscious thought became impossible due to G-forces, stress, or the split-second timing that characterized actual combat operations. You'll need someone to coordinate target identification and provide tactical guidance, Rodriguez called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of gathering spectators. Sarah glanced toward the operations center, and for just a moment their eyes met with the kind of recognition that passed between professionals who understood each other without requiring detailed explanations. "If you can keep up with close air support coordination," Sarah replied simply, her tone carrying implications that suggested this wouldn't be her first experience with such operations. Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. There was something in that response, a confidence that had nothing to do with bravado and everything to do with experience in situations where coordination between air and ground assets meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She moved to the tactical coordination station, making rapid adjustments for current weather conditions, terrain factors, and the training scenarios that had been established for the day's operations. "What's your target preference?" Webb called out, still grinning with the satisfaction of someone who believed he was orchestrating an entertaining demonstration of the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. "Standard close air support training targets should provide adequate demonstration opportunities," Morrison added, drawing additional chuckles from the growing crowd of observers. But Rodriguez was looking at something entirely different through her tactical coordination equipment. The training range had targets established at various distances and configurations to simulate different combat scenarios. But the most challenging setup was located far beyond the standard markers used for routine training flights. "There's a simulated armored convoy at maximum range," she said quietly, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating observable tactical information. "Multiple hardened targets in a defensive formation. Standard close air support protocols would call for multiple attack runs from different vectors." The casual way she mentioned maximum range targeting made several people stop their conversations and pay closer attention. Extended range close air support was beyond the operational parameters of most training scenarios, and required the kind of precision that challenged even experienced combat pilots under ideal conditions. Sarah nodded as if this was perfectly normal tactical information, then responded with technical details that made the gathered pilots exchange uncertain glances. "Wind conditions are light and variable, approximately 4 knots from the southwest. Ground thermal effects will create updrafts that could affect cannon trajectory at extended range. Target acquisition will require compensation for atmospheric distortion." The technical discussion of advanced close air support procedures made several spectators realize that this wasn't the amateur demonstration they had been expecting to witness. These two were discussing operational parameters like professionals who had coordinated similar missions under actual combat conditions where mistakes had strategic consequences. "She's not seriously considering maximum range cannon runs," someone whispered with growing uncertainty. "That's beyond normal training parameters." But Sarah was already running through her final systems checks with movements that looked choreographed in their precision. She verified weapons system status, confirmed defensive countermeasures, and began the mental calculations that every close air support pilot learned, but few ever truly mastered under the stress of actual combat operations. The flight line went quiet, with the organic hush that falls when people suddenly realize they are about to witness something significant rather than routine entertainment. The earlier mockery evaporated like morning dew, replaced by the focused attention that comes when experienced military personnel sense they are about to see capabilities they will remember for the rest of their careers. Morrison stepped closer to Delacroix, lowering his voice to avoid being overheard by the now serious crowd. "Maximum range cannon runs in these atmospheric conditions. Even our most experienced combat pilots don't attempt that kind of precision during training exercises. Webb felt his earlier confidence beginning to waver as he realized that what had started as a harmless demonstration was developing dimensions he hadn't anticipated. The test pilot strapping into the A-10 wasn't acting like someone out of her depth or unprepared for the challenge. She was moving with the kind of deliberate preparation that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, and had done similar things before, under considerably more demanding circumstances. Rodriguez made final adjustments to her coordination equipment, calculating target distances, atmospheric conditions, terrain masking, and a dozen other variables that could turn perfect weapons employment into complete mission failure at extended ranges. Her voice when she called the tactical situation carried the crisp professionalism of someone who had coordinated close air support in places where pilot error meant friendly casualties rather than training critiques. Wind conditions steady at 4 knots southwest. Atmospheric distortion moderate, reading approximately 2 meters lateral displacement at maximum range. Multiple hardened targets confirmed at bearing 270, range 8,000 meters. Behind them, the whispered conversations of personnel who had finally realized this wasn't entertainment anymore drifted across the flight line like smoke from distant fires. She's actually going to attempt close air support at that range in these conditions. Maybe we should stop this before someone gets hurt or embarrassed. Maximum range cannon runs aren't something you demonstrate casually. Webb stepped forward, his earlier bravado completely evaporated and replaced by genuine concern about the situation he had initiated. Captain Chen, you don't have to prove anything with extreme range scenarios. Standard close air support demonstrations would be perfectly adequate for our purposes. Sarah's response came through the aircraft's communication system with the calm finality of someone who had made a tactical decision and wasn't interested in second-guessing or debate. Colonel, I'm comfortable with the mission parameters as established. Rodriguez recognized that tone from her own combat experience. She had heard it from pilots who had moved beyond doubt and uncertainty into the operational mindset where everything became simple. Target, conditions, weapons employment, mission accomplishment. Everything else was just background noise that could interfere with the kind of precision that kept people alive. Sarah's breathing slowed to the controlled respiration that reduced stress responses, steadied hand movements, and created the perfect mental state for weapons employment that required absolute precision. Through her targeting systems, Rodriguez could see the heat shimmer rising from the desert floor like liquid glass, distorting everything beyond a few kilometers into wavering mirages that could throw off targeting calculations by significant margins if not properly compensated. At maximum range, those atmospheric effects would bend targeting solutions and throw impact points off by meters if the pilot hadn't developed the experience necessary to calculate and compensate for variables that weren't covered in any technical manual or training curriculum. The silence stretched tight as cable wire, while desert wind seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what would happen when theory met reality at the extreme edge of operational parameters. Sarah armed her weapon systems, her targeting solutions finding that perfect convergence of distance, atmospheric conditions, and target acquisition that would either validate years of whispered speculation about test pilot capabilities or confirm everyone's initial assumptions about the difference between maintenance flying and actual combat operations. In that suspended moment before weapons release, Rodriguez found herself wondering who Sarah Chen really was and why someone with her obvious competence and preparation was content to remain invisible, conducting routine verification flights instead of leading combat missions where her skills would be recognized and rewarded. The question would have to wait. The GAU-8 cannon was about to provide a more immediate answer about the gap between assumption and reality. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted to life with a sound that defied description, a thunderous roar that seemed to tear the very fabric of the desert air as 30mm depleted uranium rounds streaked toward their target at nearly a mile per second. The distinctive BRRRRT sound that had become legendary among ground troops echoed across the flight line, reverberating off hangar walls and causing every person within a kilometer to stop whatever they were doing and pay attention to what was happening in the sky above them. Sarah rode the aircraft's recoil with the kind of practiced ease that suggested she was part of the weapon system itself, making tiny control adjustments to maintain targeting accuracy as the cannon's violent vibration tried to throw her aim off target. The A-10 shuddered and bucked like a living thing as hundreds of rounds per second poured from the nose-mounted cannon, but she held her firing solution steady with the kind of precision that separated competent pilots from legends. Rodriguez stayed focused on her coordination equipment, tracking the targeting solution and impact assessment through magnified optics that allowed her to observe effects at distances that challenged normal visual range. At maximum range close air support, there was always that eternal moment when rounds were in flight, but results remained unknown. When physics and ballistics played out their ancient mathematics, while everyone waited to see whether training met reality or theory collapsed under operational pressure. The seconds felt like hours as depleted uranium penetrators crossed 8 kilometers of shimmering desert air, their trajectory affected by atmospheric conditions that most pilots never learned to calculate properly. The gathered observers held their collective breath, straining to see impact effects that Rodriguez could observe through her magnified targeting systems. "Target destruction confirmed," Rodriguez called, her voice carefully controlled despite what she was witnessing through her coordination equipment. "Multiple direct hits on primary targets. Secondary explosions indicate complete mission accomplishment." The silence that followed was complete and profound, extending far beyond the immediate observers to encompass maintenance personnel, ground crews, and administrative staff who had stopped their work to listen to the unmistakable sound of precision weapons employment at ranges they knew exceeded normal training parameters. "Confirm target engagement parameters," Webb said, his earlier confidence completely evaporated and replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like professional anxiety. Rodriguez double-checked her coordination systems, verified range calculations, and confirmed the targeting data that she had already calculated twice during the mission setup phase. 8,000 meters, multiple hardened targets, complete destruction with single cannon run, she confirmed, her voice carrying the weight of professional certainty that came from years of coordinating similar missions under considerably more challenging circumstances. "Clean hits, textbook weapons employment, perfect mission execution." Someone dropped a piece of ground equipment, the metallic clatter seeming obscenely loud in the sudden quiet that had settled over the flight line like a physical presence. "That's not possible for a test pilot," one of the younger maintenance personnel whispered, his words carrying all the conviction of someone whose understanding of professional competence had just been fundamentally challenged. "Not possible for most of us," Rodriguez corrected quietly, her eyes still focused on the distant target area through her coordination equipment. "But then again, most of us aren't her." Sarah brought the A-10 around in a perfect recovery pattern, clearing the target area and setting up for landing approach with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated throughout the mission. She didn't celebrate, didn't broadcast her success, didn't even acknowledge the perfect weapons employment she had just demonstrated. Instead, she followed standard post-engagement procedures with the kind of automatic precision that spoke of countless repetitions under various conditions. The implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in gradually, like water seeping through concrete foundations. This wasn't a lucky shot or a favorable atmospheric condition that had produced an unexpectedly good result. This was someone demonstrating a level of close air support capability that belonged in military legends rather than routine training exercises. Colonel Webb found his voice, though it came out rougher and more uncertain than he had intended. "Let's see that again, Captain. Single weapon employment could be atmospheric conditions, favorable wind patterns, or equipment calibration factors. Multiple engagement demonstration would provide better assessment of consistent capability." The request hung in the air like a challenge, but Sarah showed no sign of being offended by the implication that her weapons employment might have been accidental or influenced by factors beyond her control. She looked toward the operations center where Rodriguez was coordinating, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since the mission had begun. "Different target array, same range parameters. Different approach vector?" Rodriguez asked, adjusting her coordination equipment to fresh targets that had been established at the same impossible distance. "Atmospheric conditions are changing as thermal effects increase with rising temperature. Wind has shifted to variable patterns that will affect trajectory calculations." The second weapons engagement was even more impressive than the first, because now everyone understood exactly what they were witnessing. This wasn't a fluke or a happy coincidence influenced by favorable conditions. This was someone demonstrating absolute mastery of close air support skills that most combat pilots had only heard about in stories told by instructors who had served in conflicts that remained classified decades after their conclusion. Sarah set up her approach with the same methodical precision, calculated targeting solutions based on Rodriguez's updated atmospheric and tactical information, and employed her weapons with the kind of timing and accuracy that bordered on supernatural. The GAU-8 cannon roared its distinctive song across the desert, depleted uranium rounds found their targets with mechanical precision, and secondary explosions confirmed that maximum range close air support wasn't just theoretically possible, but practically achievable in the right hands. "Impact confirmed," Rodriguez called, her voice carrying a respect that hadn't been present an hour earlier. "Complete target destruction, perfect weapons employment, textbook mission execution under challenging atmospheric conditions." This time the silence felt different, not shock exactly, but recognition of the kind that came when military professionals realized they were witnessing capabilities that transcended normal operational categories and entered the realm of the truly exceptional. Delacroix, the pilot who had started the morning with jokes about test pilots and aviation mechanics, stepped forward hesitantly. His earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by something approaching professional awe. "Captain," he said quietly, "how long have you been flying close air support missions?" Sarah completed her post-engagement checklist and looked at him with the same neutral expression she had maintained throughout the morning's activities. "Long enough," she said simply, offering an answer that satisfied no one's curiosity but carried implications that suggested pushing for more detailed information wouldn't be welcome or wise. Rodriguez, however, was assembling pieces of a puzzle in her mind, fragments that were forming a picture she recognized from classified briefings and whispered conversations in secure facilities where people discussed operations that officially had never happened. She accessed her secure terminal, inputting search parameters that required security clearances most personnel didn't possess, and background investigations that could take months to complete. What appeared on her screen made her read the information twice to ensure she wasn't misunderstanding what the database was telling her. The data was fragmentary by design. Most of it was classified above her access level, despite her own extensive background in sensitive operations. But what she could see painted a picture that explained everything, while simultaneously raising questions that she realized she would never be authorized to ask. Contract pilot assignments in operational theaters that didn't appear on standard deployment records. Training certifications that had been redacted beyond recognition. Performance evaluations that used terms like unprecedented and exceptional, before disappearing behind security classifications that suggested involvement in operations where success and failure were measured in strategic rather than tactical terms. She looked up from her terminal to find Sarah watching her with the kind of steady gaze that suggested she knew exactly what Rodriguez was reading and wasn't particularly concerned about the implications of having her background investigated by someone with appropriate security clearances. "Captain," Rodriguez said quietly, moving closer to ensure their conversation couldn't be overheard by the crowd of observers who were still processing what they had witnessed. "I think we owe you considerably more than an apology." Sarah secured her aircraft systems and began the methodical process of post-flight inspection with the same attention to detail she had shown throughout the day's activities. "You don't owe me anything, Major," she said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had been present all morning, hidden beneath the surface of routine maintenance work and systems verification. "But you might consider paying attention to people's actual qualifications before making assumptions about their capabilities based on current job assignments." The words weren't harsh, but they carried weight that extended far beyond simple professional criticism. This was someone who had just demonstrated capabilities that redefined what was possible under challenging operational conditions, offering advice that came from a perspective none of them could fully comprehend or appreciate. As she walked toward the operations building, Rodriguez felt compelled to ask the question that had been building in her mind since the first impossible weapons engagement had found its target with surgical precision. "Captain," she called out, her voice carrying across the now quiet flight line, "who are you really?" Sarah paused at the entrance to the building, her silhouette framed against the blazing afternoon sun that turned her into a shadow against the harsh desert landscape. For a moment, it looked like she might actually answer, might provide some explanation for the skills they had witnessed and the competence they had systematically underestimated based on surface appearances and job assignments. Instead, she adjusted her flight gear and offered the kind of response that raised more questions than it answered, while simultaneously closing off further inquiry into matters that were clearly none of their business. "Someone who used to do this for a living," she said simply, her words carrying implications about places and operations that existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and classified denial. In places where missing the target wasn't an option, and close air support meant the difference between troops coming home and families receiving folded flags. Then she was gone, disappearing into the air-conditioned sanctuary of the operations building and leaving behind a flight line full of combat pilots who would never again assume that quiet competence was the same thing as limited capability. They were beginning to understand that legends sometimes walked among them wearing nothing more impressive than routine job assignments and the kind of understated professionalism that made extraordinary skills look like ordinary work. The afternoon training sessions continued, but the atmosphere on the flight line had fundamentally changed in ways that would influence how these pilots approached their profession for the rest of their careers. The casual arrogance that had defined the morning was gone, replaced by a more thoughtful approach to everything from personnel evaluation to the recognition that competence came in forms they hadn't learned to recognize. Word of Sarah's impossible weapons employment was already spreading through the base's informal communication networks, the kind of whispered conversations that happened in ready rooms and maintenance hangars when people encountered something that didn't fit into normal operational categories, or challenged their assumptions about who possessed exceptional capabilities and why those people might choose to remain invisible. Rodriguez found herself unable to concentrate on the routine coordination duties that filled the rest of her shift. The image of Sarah's perfect close air support demonstration kept replaying in her mind, along with nagging fragments of memory that suggested she had encountered similar precision in classified briefings about operations that she wasn't supposed to discuss with people who lacked appropriate security clearances. During a break between training rotations, she approached the intelligence officer who had been checking classified databases during Sarah's background investigation. Major Patricia Santos was career military intelligence, the kind of professional who had spent 2 decades managing information that could reshape strategic understanding of conflicts that the public would never hear about in detail. "What exactly did you find in that database search?" Rodriguez asked quietly, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard by personnel who lacked the security clearances necessary for this kind of discussion. Santos glanced around to confirm they had privacy, then accessed her secure terminal again, with the kind of careful attention that suggested the information she was about to share carried implications beyond routine personnel curiosity. "Fragments of a career that's been deliberately obscured," she said, scrolling through screens of partially redacted text that painted an incomplete picture of exceptional service in exceptional circumstances. "Her pilot record goes back 12 years, but most of it disappears behind classification levels I don't have access to. What I can see suggests she's flown combat missions in every major theater of operation since Afghanistan, but always as contract personnel rather than regular military assignment." She showed Rodriguez performance evaluations that used language typically reserved for pilots who had demonstrated capabilities under the most demanding operational conditions. "Look at these mission assessments. Exceptional close air support delivery under extreme conditions. Recommended for specialized assignment based on unprecedented precision weapons employment. Clearance level upgraded for sensitive operational requirements." Santos scrolled through more screens, each one revealing tantalizing glimpses of a career that had been systematically removed from normal view. "Then everything goes completely dark about 3 years ago. Total classification, need to know access only. The only reason I can see her current contractor status is because she's working on routine aircraft maintenance that doesn't require operational security protocols." Rodriguez studied the limited information visible between the security redactions and classification barriers. It painted a picture of someone whose skills had been recognized at the highest levels of military command, then deliberately hidden from normal scrutiny for reasons that probably involved operations too sensitive for standard acknowledgement. "There's something else," Santos continued, lowering her voice further despite their secure location. "I cross-referenced her name through operational databases I do have access to. She appears in the background of some of the most significant close air support missions of the past decade. Never as primary personnel, never in prominent roles, but always present when precision weapons employment was required under impossible conditions." She showed Rodriguez a series of deployment records where Sarah's name appeared in contractor manifests and support documentation, always in secondary roles that wouldn't attract attention or generate the kind of recognition that led to public acknowledgement. But the operations themselves were legendary among close air support communities, the kind of missions that save strategic situations through the precise application of overwhelming force delivered with surgical accuracy. She's a ghost pilot, Rodriguez realized, understanding the implications of what Santos was showing her. Someone with capabilities that get called in when normal military channels aren't sufficient for the operational requirements, but who stays invisible in the official records to maintain operational security and plausible deniability. That's exactly what it looks like, Santos confirmed. And based on what we witnessed today, whoever has been hiring her has been getting exceptional value for their investment in maintaining her services and keeping her background classified. Meanwhile, in the base commander's office, a different kind of conversation was taking place as news of the day's demonstration reached command levels that typically dealt with strategic rather than tactical concerns. Brigadier General Patricia Martinez had been briefed on the day's events by multiple sources, each report more extraordinary than the last, and each raising questions about how someone with such capabilities had ended up conducting routine maintenance flights rather than leading combat missions. As someone who had spent 30 years in military aviation, she had learned to be skeptical of stories that seemed too impressive to be credible. But she had also learned to pay attention when multiple reliable sources independently confirmed the same extraordinary details, especially when those details involved capabilities that could influence operational outcomes in significant ways. "Let me understand this correctly," she said to Webb, who sat uncomfortably across from her desk with the uncomfortable posture of someone whose professional judgment had been called into serious question. A contract pilot demonstrated close air support capabilities that exceed anything in our current training standards, using aircraft she had just finished inspecting, at ranges that most of our combat veterans wouldn't attempt under ideal conditions? "Yes, ma'am," Webb replied, his earlier confidence completely absent from his voice. 2 separate weapons engagements, both at maximum range, both resulting in complete target destruction with single cannon runs. Perfect precision under challenging atmospheric conditions. "And your assessment of this contractor prior to today's demonstration?" Webb shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with having to acknowledge how completely he had misjudged someone whose capabilities apparently exceeded those of his most experienced combat pilots. "General, I assumed she was simply another maintenance test pilot. Her credentials appeared routine, her behavior was unremarkable, and she gave no indication of possessing advanced combat skills beyond basic flight qualifications." General Martinez accessed her own classified databases, inputting search parameters that went several levels deeper than what Santos had been able to access through normal intelligence channels. What she discovered made her lean back in her chair with the expression of someone whose assumptions about personnel management and operational security had just been significantly adjusted. "Colonel Webb," she said quietly, turning her monitor so he could see the heavily redacted documents that filled the screen, though most of the critical details remained hidden behind security classifications. "This contractor has been involved in operations that are classified so far above your clearance level that I can't even acknowledge they exist without violating federal security statutes." She scrolled through performance evaluations and mission assessments that painted a picture of someone whose capabilities had been recognized and utilized at the highest levels of military command. Her skills aren't just advanced or exceptional. They're legendary among people who coordinate the kind of operations that reshape strategic situations through precise application of overwhelming force. Webb studied the fragments of information visible between the redactions, trying to comprehend how someone with such an extraordinary background had ended up conducting routine maintenance flights at his base without anyone recognizing her true qualifications. "General, if her capabilities are at that level, why is she content to remain in a support role rather than leading combat missions where her skills would be properly utilized and recognized?" The question revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that Martinez had seen repeatedly throughout her career, the assumption that exceptional people always sought recognition and advancement rather than choosing anonymity for reasons that went beyond professional ambition or personal ego. "Think about what level of operational experience would be required to develop that kind of precision under pressure," she said, her words carrying the weight of someone who understood the psychological costs associated with the kind of missions that required absolute perfection under impossible conditions. Now consider what psychological toll that experience might exact on someone who survived it long enough to achieve mastery. Martinez had seen enough classified reports to understand that people like Sarah Chen operated at levels where individual performance had strategic consequences, where mission success and failure were measured in lives saved or lost rather than training scores or performance evaluations. The skills they developed came with costs that weren't immediately apparent to observers who admired their capabilities from a safe distance. "She's not hiding from anything," Martinez continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had managed similar personnel throughout her career. "She's choosing a different way to use her capabilities, one that allows her to contribute without being responsible for outcomes that require her to make decisions about who lives and who dies based on the precision of her weapons employment." The implications of this perspective settled over Webb like a physical weight, as he began to understand that his morning's entertainment had actually been an encounter with someone whose operational background involved responsibilities he couldn't fully comprehend. The casual challenge he had issued had forced someone out of chosen anonymity and into a demonstration that would inevitably generate the kind of attention she had been working to avoid. That afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected communication that confirmed her worst fears about the consequences of being forced into visibility. The message came through encrypted channels that she recognized but had hoped never to encounter again. The kind of secure communication that indicated her day's activities had already been noted by people who made it their business to track individuals with her particular skill set. The message was brief and professionally worded, but its implications were clear enough to anyone who understood the operational realities behind the bureaucratic language. "Impressive demonstration of capabilities today. Multiple contract opportunities available for personnel with verified close air support expertise. Immediate deployment possible for ongoing operational requirements." Sarah read the message twice before deleting it without responding, though she knew that failing to reply wouldn't make the interest disappear. She had been down this road before, and the cost of returning to that kind of work went far beyond anything that could be measured in monetary compensation or professional recognition. The skills she had demonstrated were still sharp. Today had proven that beyond any doubt, but the willingness to use them in their original context was something she had deliberately left behind in places that officially didn't exist on any map or operational record. But she couldn't entirely suppress a sense of satisfaction at having reminded a group of overconfident pilots that competence came in many forms, and that respect should be the default approach to anyone whose background and capabilities they didn't fully understand. The lesson might serve them well in future assignments where such mistakes could have more serious consequences than professional embarrassment. Her phone buzzed again with another encrypted message, this one from a number she recognized from her previous career but hadn't heard from in over 2 years. The contact represented the kind of operational oversight that existed in the gray areas between official military command and classified contract work. "Sarah, we need to discuss the visibility issues created by today's demonstration. Current operational security protocols may be compromised by increased attention to your background and capabilities. Recommend immediate consultation to address potential complications." The message carried implications that went beyond simple career management or professional development. People in her previous line of work didn't retire in the conventional sense. They transitioned to different applications of their skills, while maintaining the kind of low profile that prevented their operational history from becoming a liability to ongoing classified programs. Today's demonstration had shattered that carefully maintained anonymity in ways that could have consequences for operations and personnel that she was no longer supposed to know about, but couldn't simply forget. The precision she had displayed would inevitably generate speculation about her training and background, speculation that could lead to uncomfortable questions about programs that required absolute secrecy to remain effective. She drove to the meeting location with the growing awareness that her carefully constructed post-operational life was about to undergo changes that she had hoped to avoid indefinitely. The transition from active operations to support roles had been designed to allow her to use her skills without carrying the psychological burden of high-stakes responsibility, but circumstances were forcing her back toward the kind of visibility that made peaceful anonymity impossible to maintain. The meeting took place at a small cafe in Tucson, the kind of anonymous location where two people could have a serious conversation without attracting the attention of observers who might be curious about classified matters being discussed in civilian settings. David Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, looked older than she remembered, with the kind of weathered appearance that came from years of managing operations that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. "Your demonstration at Davis-Monthan has created ripple effects that extend beyond local base gossip," he said without preamble, his directness indicating that this conversation involved serious operational concerns rather than casual career counseling. "People are making connections between your displayed capabilities and classified programs that we prefer to keep separated from public scrutiny." Sarah had anticipated this conversation from the moment she had decided to accept Webb's challenge, rather than finding a way to deflect it without generating suspicion. I was attempting to educate some pilots about making assumptions based on appearances. I didn't anticipate that precision weapons employment would generate this level of interest or investigation. The problem isn't what you did, Chen replied, pulling out a secure tablet that displayed several articles and social media posts that had appeared since her demonstration. The problem is how exceptional you are at it. Skills like yours don't develop through civilian training or routine military assignments, and people with sufficient background knowledge are starting to ask questions that lead toward operations we've worked very hard to keep buried. He showed her multiple discussions that had appeared on military forums and professional networks, speculation about her background that was getting uncomfortably close to accurate conclusions about her operational history. Some of the posts included technical analysis of her weapons employment that demonstrated understanding of classified tactics and procedures. We have several options for managing this situation before it develops into a security liability. Chen continued, his tone carrying the weight of someone who had dealt with similar complications before. You can accept a contract position that provides official cover for your capabilities. You can relocate to an area where the story loses momentum through geographical separation. Or we can arrange for a demonstration that makes it clear to interested parties that continued speculation would be inadvisable. Sarah understood the implications behind each option. The first would return her to the kind of operational work she had deliberately chosen to leave behind. The second would require abandoning the life she had carefully built in favor of starting over in a location where her skills wouldn't be recognized or valued. The third would involve using her capabilities in a way that sent an unmistakable message about the consequences of unwanted attention. There's a fourth option, she said quietly, though she suspected Chen wouldn't find it acceptable given the operational security concerns he had outlined. Chen waited with the patient attention of someone who had learned that unconventional solutions were often worth considering, especially when they came from people whose previous performance had exceeded all expectations under challenging conditions. I complete my current contracts, fulfill my obligations professionally, and then transition completely away from any work that involves military facilities or government installations. Private sector consulting, civilian instruction, equipment testing for companies that don't require security clearances or background investigations. The suggestion hung between them like a challenge to the assumption that people with her capabilities were obligated to remain available for classified work regardless of their personal preferences or psychological well-being. That would mean walking away from skills that represent over a decade of specialized training and operational experience. Chen observed, his tone suggesting that such a decision would constitute a significant loss to national security interests. David, I spent 12 years being available for missions that most people can't imagine, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had counted the personal cost of exceptional service and found it approaching the limits of what she was willing to pay. I've been responsible for outcomes that affected strategic situations I can't discuss, made split-second decisions that determined whether ground troops lived or died, and carried the psychological weight of perfect precision under impossible conditions. She paused to let the implications of her words settle before continuing with the kind of finality that indicated this wasn't a negotiating position but a firm decision about her future priorities. I'm tired of being exceptional at things that require that kind of emotional and psychological investment. I want to use my skills in ways that contribute to success without requiring me to carry responsibility for life and death outcomes, or maintain operational security for programs that exist in legal and ethical gray areas. The weight of her declaration settled between them like a physical presence. Chen had managed enough classified operations to understand what she was really saying, that skills like hers were developed through experiences that left permanent psychological scars on the people who survived them, and that there came a point where the personal cost of maintaining those capabilities exceeded their strategic value. If you disappear from this kind of work completely, Chen said carefully, what happens the next time there's a situation that requires your specific combination of skills and experience? Sarah's response came without hesitation, carrying the conviction of someone who had given this question considerable thought and reached a conclusion that prioritized personal peace over professional obligation. Someone else will have to handle it. There are always other people, David. Maybe not as experienced, maybe not as precise, but competent enough to accomplish the mission objectives. The military functioned before I started doing this work, and it will continue to function after I stop. As she walked away from that cafe, Sarah experienced something she hadn't felt in years. the lightness that came with making a decision that prioritized personal well-being over professional expectations. The demonstration at Davis-Monthan had inadvertently forced her to choose between continuing to use skills that defined her past and embracing a future that allowed her to move beyond them. The choice, when it finally came down to fundamental priorities, had been clearer than she had expected. But first, she had one more obligation to fulfill and one final lesson to teach. Not about close air support precision this time, but about the kind of quiet dignity that came with knowing when to walk away from something you were exceptionally good at in favor of something that allowed you to sleep peacefully at night. Back at Davis-Monthan, the ripple effects of Sarah's demonstration continued to spread through the base community in ways that would influence military culture long after she had moved on to other work. The casual dismissiveness that had characterized the morning's interactions had been replaced by a more thoughtful approach to personnel evaluation and professional respect. Cross, who had witnessed the entire exchange from his position in the operations center, found himself reassessing every interaction he had ever had with support personnel and civilian contractors. The realization that he had probably encountered other individuals with exceptional backgrounds and capabilities without recognizing them was both humbling and educational. Morrison and Delacroix, the pilots who had initiated the morning's mockery, were processing their own reactions to having their assumptions so thoroughly demolished by someone they had dismissed as unqualified for serious consideration. The experience had shaken their confidence in ways that would make them more careful about judging people based on surface appearances and current job assignments. "I keep thinking about how she just ignored our comments all morning," Morrison said during a quiet conversation in the pilot's ready room. "Not like she was angry or offended, but like our opinions weren't worth the energy it would take to correct our misunderstandings." Delacroix nodded grimly, still processing the implications of what they had witnessed. And then when she finally did respond, it wasn't with words or explanations, it was with that weapons employment demonstration. Like she was saying, "This is who I actually am, and your assumptions never mattered anyway." The experience had challenged both pilots in ways that went beyond simple professional embarrassment. They had built their identities around being among the best at what they did, earning recognition through demonstrated competence, and developing the kind of professional pride that came with being acknowledged as exceptional within their field. But Sarah's demonstration had revealed the existence of levels of capability they hadn't even known were possible, achieved by someone who wore no uniform, displayed no rank insignia, and seemed content to remain invisible until circumstances forced her to prove otherwise. "Makes you wonder how many other people we've dismissed without really seeing them," Delacroix said quietly, his words carrying the weight of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally altered by a single afternoon's education. "How many individuals are out there with capabilities we can't even imagine, just because they don't fit our expectations of what exceptional competence looks like?" The question would influence how both pilots approach their profession for the rest of their careers, making them more likely to treat everyone with the kind of respectful attention that recognized hidden depths and unacknowledged expertise. Rodriguez, meanwhile, was dealing with her own professional revelation about the gap between assumption and reality in military personnel evaluation. As someone responsible for coordinating complex operations that required precise integration of multiple capabilities, she had learned to identify competence quickly and accurately. But Sarah's demonstration had forced her to acknowledge that her evaluation skills were apparently less reliable than she had believed, and that exceptional capabilities could be hidden behind unremarkable job assignments and deliberately low profiles. She requested a meeting with General Martinez, ostensibly to discuss operational coordination procedures, but really to try to understand how the military could better identify and utilize personnel whose capabilities exceeded their current assignments. "General, we have a systemic problem with recognizing exceptional competence when it doesn't present itself in conventional ways," she said, settling into the chair across from Martinez's desk. "Today's demonstration proved that we're missing capabilities that could significantly enhance our operational effectiveness." Martinez had been expecting this conversation. In her experience, good officers learned from situations that challenged their assumptions, while poor officers made excuses or tried to minimize what had happened to protect their professional egos. "Lisa, I've been in military aviation for 3 decades, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've encountered skills like what was demonstrated today," she replied, accessing Sarah's classified file on her secure terminal. "The people who possess those capabilities don't fit normal patterns, and they don't announce themselves in ways we're trained to recognize or evaluate." She turned her monitor so Rodriguez could see the fragments of information that were visible, despite the extensive redactions and security classifications. What I can tell you is that contractors like Captain Chen don't end up in routine support roles by accident or oversight. They choose those positions because they prefer anonymity over recognition, contribution over command, and peaceful application of their skills over the kind of high-stakes responsibility that originally developed those capabilities. Rodriguez studied the limited information available on the screen, trying to understand the kind of operational background that would lead someone to choose invisibility over the recognition and advancement that exceptional skills typically brought in military careers. But why would someone with capabilities at that level choose to remain in the background rather than leading operations where their expertise could have maximum impact? She asked. Martinez's response carried the weight of someone who had managed enough classified operations to understand the psychological costs associated with exceptional service under extreme conditions. Think about what kind of experiences would be required to develop that level of precision under pressure, she said, her words forcing Rodriguez to consider aspects of military service that were rarely discussed in professional development contexts. Now consider what psychological toll those experiences might exact on someone who survived them long enough to achieve absolute mastery. The implications of this perspective began to reshape how Rodriguez thought about personnel management and the assumption that exceptional people always sought maximum responsibility and visibility. Some individuals, she realized, reached a point where they had given enough of themselves to high-stakes operations and chose to contribute in ways that didn't require them to carry the weight of strategic consequences or life-and-death decision-making. She's not avoiding responsibility, Martinez continued, recognizing the direction of Rodriguez's thoughts. She's choosing a different way to exercise responsibility, one that allows her to use her exceptional skills without being required to make the kind of decisions that kept her awake at night for years after the operations were officially completed. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment reviewing the events of a day that had fundamentally altered her carefully maintained anonymity and forced her to confront decisions she had hoped to postpone indefinitely. The transition from active operations to support work had been designed to provide a sustainable way to use her skills without carrying the psychological burden that came with strategic responsibility. But today's demonstration had shattered the invisibility that made that transition possible, and the consequences were already manifesting in ways that threatened the peaceful life she had worked to build. The encrypted messages on her phone represented a return to the kind of work that had defined the first part of her career, operations that existed in the gray areas between official acknowledgement and classified denial. She had declined those opportunities before, choosing anonymity over recognition, support roles over command positions, and personal peace over professional advancement. But the visibility generated by today's demonstration was making that choice increasingly difficult to maintain. The skills remained as sharp as ever. The muscle memory and mental calculations that enabled precision weapons employment under impossible conditions hadn't deteriorated through disuse, but the willingness to apply those skills in their original context, to accept responsibility for strategic outcomes and carry the psychological weight of perfect performance under pressure, was something she had deliberately chosen to leave behind. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from Rodriguez requesting a private meeting to discuss, quote, professional development opportunities and operational coordination procedures. The language was carefully neutral, but Sarah recognized the underlying curiosity about her background and capabilities that would inevitably lead to questions she preferred not to answer. She had spent 3 years building a life that allowed her to contribute without being exceptional, to use her skills without being responsible for outcomes that affected strategic situations, or determined whether people lived or died based on the precision of her performance. The demonstration at Davis-Monthan had threatened that carefully constructed balance in ways that would require difficult decisions about her future priorities. But first, she had one more lesson to teach, not about weapons employment or tactical precision, but about the wisdom that came with understanding when exceptional capabilities were better served through quiet contribution rather than public recognition. The choice between visibility and anonymity, between command and support, between being acknowledged as exceptional and being allowed to contribute peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult conversations about her future. But tonight, she could still enjoy the satisfaction that came with having reminded a group of overconfident pilots that assumptions about people's capabilities were usually wrong, and that respect should be the default approach to anyone whose background and qualifications they didn't fully understand. The lesson would influence how those pilots approached their profession for years to come, making them more likely to recognize hidden competence and treat everyone with the kind of professional courtesy that acknowledged the possibility of extraordinary capabilities hiding behind ordinary appearances. And somewhere in the transition between active operations and peaceful anonymity, Sarah had discovered that the greatest impact sometimes came not from being recognized as exceptional, but from choosing to remain invisible while quietly changing how others approached the world around them. The demonstration would become legend, but the woman who had performed it would successfully return to the shadows she preferred, leaving behind only the memory of impossible precision-made routine and the enduring understanding that legends walked among them every day, asking only for the professional respect that should be everyone's default setting when encountering quiet competence. 3 weeks after Sarah's demonstration at Davis-Monthan, the consequences of her forced visibility were manifesting in ways that confirmed her worst fears about the fragility of carefully maintained anonymity. What had started as a single moment of exceptional performance was evolving into something that threatened the peaceful existence she had worked years to establish away from the high-stakes world of classified operations. The first indication that her situation was deteriorating came through official channels that she had hoped never to encounter again. A certified letter arrived at her apartment bearing the seal of the Department of Defense, containing language that was politely worded but unmistakably clear in its implications about her future availability for specialized assignments. Captain Chen, your recent demonstration of advanced close air support capabilities has been noted by personnel responsible for maintaining operational readiness and specialized mission parameters. Your expertise may be required for upcoming assignments that match your unique qualifications and operational background. The letter was signed by officials whose names she didn't recognize but whose authority she understood all too well. These were people who managed assets rather than personnel, who viewed exceptional capabilities as resources to be deployed rather than individuals with personal preferences about how their skills should be utilized. Sarah read the letter twice before filing it in the folder where she kept documents related to her transition away from classified work. The accumulation of such correspondence over the past 3 weeks painted a clear picture of mounting pressure to return to the kind of operational assignments she had deliberately chosen to leave behind. But the official interest was only part of a larger problem that was developing across multiple fronts simultaneously. Military aviation forums were buzzing with speculation about her background and capabilities, some of it uncomfortably accurate in its analysis of the tactical procedures she had demonstrated. Defense contractors were making inquiries about her availability for consulting work that would require her to travel to locations that didn't appear on standard maps. Most concerning of all, she had begun to notice the subtle signs of surveillance that indicated someone was taking a more active interest in her daily activities than could be explained by routine background investigations or professional curiosity. The surveillance wasn't heavy-handed or obvious, but it was present in ways that someone with her operational background couldn't fail to recognize. The same vehicles appearing in different locations over multiple days, individuals whose presence in various establishments seemed designed to observe rather than participate, and the kind of electronic interference that suggested her communications were being monitored by people with sophisticated technical capabilities. Sarah had expected some level of renewed interest in her background following the Davis-Monthan demonstration, but the scope and intensity of the attention she was receiving suggested that her skills had been noted by people whose requirements went far beyond routine military assignments or standard defense contracting opportunities. Her phone rang with an encrypted call from Peterson, the handler who had managed her transition from active operations to civilian contractor status 3 years earlier. His voice carried the tension of someone dealing with complications that had exceeded normal parameters for managing former assets. "Sarah, we have a problem that's bigger than we initially assessed," he said without preamble, his directness indicating that this conversation involved serious security concerns rather than routine check-ins. "Your demonstration has generated interest from sources that we didn't anticipate, and some of that interest is coming from directions that could compromise ongoing operations." She had been expecting this call since the surveillance had become apparent, though she had hoped that the security implications of her visibility could be managed through normal channels without requiring her direct involvement in damage control measures. "What kind of interest, and from what sources?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the general nature of the problem. Foreign intelligence services have been making inquiries about American contractors with advanced close air support capabilities. Some of their questions are getting uncomfortably specific about tactical procedures that are supposed to be classified, and they're focusing their attention on recent demonstrations of exceptional precision under challenging conditions. Peterson's words confirmed her suspicions about the broader implications of her forced visibility. Skills like hers didn't develop through civilian training or routine military assignments. And foreign intelligence agencies were sophisticated enough to recognize capabilities that indicated involvement in classified operations. Additionally, Peterson continued, domestic agencies are asking questions about operational security protocols and whether former assets with your background require closer oversight to prevent inadvertent disclosure of sensitive information through public demonstrations. The combination of foreign interest and domestic concern created exactly the kind of security dilemma that Sarah had hoped to avoid by maintaining a low profile and limiting her activities to routine support work that didn't showcase her exceptional capabilities. "What are my options?" she asked, though she suspected that the menu of choices would be limited and that all of them would require her to abandon the peaceful anonymity she had worked to establish. Officially, you can accept a consulting contract that provides government cover for your capabilities and puts you back under direct oversight. Unofficially, you can relocate to a location where the story loses momentum and foreign interest diminishes through geographical separation and time. Peterson paused before continuing with the third option, his tone indicating that this choice carried implications he preferred not to discuss over encrypted communications. Or we can arrange for a definitive demonstration that makes it clear to all interested parties that continued attention to your background and capabilities would be inadvisable for their continued operational security. Sarah understood the implications behind each choice. The first would return her to the world of classified operations and government oversight that she had deliberately chosen to leave behind. The second would require abandoning the life she had built in favor of starting over in a location where her skills wouldn't be recognized or valued. The third option involved using her capabilities in a way that would permanently resolve the security concerns, by ensuring that anyone considering unwanted interest in her background would have compelling reasons to direct their attention elsewhere. There's a fourth possibility, she said, though she knew Peterson would find it unsatisfactory given the security complications that her visibility had created. "I'm listening. I disappear completely from any work that could generate military or government interest. No more defense contractors, no more military facilities, no more assignments that require security clearances or background investigations. Complete transition to civilian work that has no connection to my operational background." The suggestion represented a more radical departure from her previous career than any of the options Peterson had outlined, but it offered the possibility of resolving the security concerns without requiring her to return to classified work or relocate to avoid unwanted attention. That would mean walking away from the only applications of your skills that match your qualifications and experience, Peterson observed. You'd be starting over in areas where your exceptional capabilities wouldn't be recognized or properly utilized. "David, I'd be starting over in areas where my exceptional capabilities wouldn't be required or expected," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference between being underutilized and being allowed to use your skills without carrying the psychological weight of strategic responsibility." She had given this possibility considerable thought since the first encrypted messages had arrived, and the mounting pressure to return to classified work had only strengthened her conviction that complete separation was the only way to achieve the kind of peaceful existence she wanted. "I want to use my precision and attention to detail in ways that contribute to success without requiring me to make decisions about who lives or dies based on the accuracy of my performance. I want to solve problems that don't involve national security implications or operational security protocols." The weight of her decisions settled between them during the pause that followed. Peterson had managed enough former assets to understand that people who had operated at Sarah's level often reached a point where the personal cost of maintaining their exceptional capabilities exceeded the professional satisfaction or financial compensation that such work provided. "If you disappear completely from defense-related work," he said carefully, "it resolves the immediate security concerns, but it also means losing access to someone whose capabilities represent years of specialized training and operational investment. David, I gave 12 years of my life to operations that I can't discuss with anyone who lacks appropriate security clearances. I've carried responsibilities that most people can't imagine and made split-second decisions that affected outcomes at strategic levels. I've earned the right to choose how I use my skills for the rest of my career." Her words carried the finality of someone who had counted the personal cost of exceptional service and decided that the price of continued availability was higher than she was willing to pay. "Someone else will have to handle the missions that require my specific combination of skills and experience. The military has exceptional people coming up through the ranks every year, and they'll develop the capabilities needed to meet future operational requirements. After ending the call, Sarah felt the clarity that came with making a decision that prioritized personal well-being over professional obligations or security concerns. The demonstration at Davis-Monthan had forced her to choose between visibility and anonymity, between continued involvement in classified operations and complete separation from that world. The choice, when it came down to fundamental questions about how she wanted to spend the rest of her life, had been clearer than she had expected. But implementing that choice would require careful planning and decisive action to ensure that her transition away from defense-related work was complete and permanent. Her final military-related assignment came through channels that she hadn't expected, a request from General Martinez to return to Davis-Monthan for what was described as, quote, consultation on training procedures and personnel evaluation protocols. The language was carefully neutral, but Sarah recognized it as an opportunity to provide closure to the situation that had started with her weapons demonstration. She arrived at the base on a Thursday morning to find that the atmosphere had changed significantly since her previous visit. The casual dismissiveness that had characterized her first encounter with the pilots had been replaced by a respectful attention that bordered on reverence. But there was also an underlying tension that suggested people were still processing the implications of what they had witnessed. Rodriguez was waiting for her at the operations center, along with several personnel she recognized from her demonstration and others whose presence indicated that word of her capabilities had spread beyond the immediate witnesses. But their body language had evolved completely from their previous interactions, replacing casual arrogance with the kind of alert respect typically reserved for visiting dignitaries or legendary instructors. Captain Chen, Rodriguez said formally, welcome back. General Martinez has requested that you brief our advanced pilot development program on precision weapons employment and operational mindset before completing your consultation here. Sarah set down her equipment bag and looked around at the assembled faces. Young pilots who had learned through her previous demonstration that competence came in forms they hadn't expected and from sources they hadn't recognized. But she could also see something else in their expressions, the kind of eager anticipation that came from people who thought they were about to receive secrets that would transform their own capabilities. I'm here to consult on training procedures, she said quietly, not to teach courses that your regular instructors are perfectly qualified to handle. Morrison stepped forward, his earlier mockery completely replaced by earnest respect that reflected how thoroughly the previous encounter had altered his perspective on professional competence and personnel evaluation. Ma'am, we've been analyzing the tactical procedures you demonstrated. They've improved our precision significantly, but we understand we're only seeing the surface level of what's possible with advanced training and operational experience. The surface level is where most pilots operate successfully throughout their entire careers, Sarah replied, beginning to organize her consultation materials with the same methodical precision she had shown during her previous visit. Going deeper requires experiences that most of you wouldn't want to have and shouldn't need to have. Her words carried an undercurrent that several of the more experienced personnel recognized, the suggestion that exceptional capabilities came with personal costs that weren't immediately apparent to those who admired them from a safe distance. Delacroix approached hesitantly, his demeanor completely transformed from the confident pilot who had made dismissive comments about test pilots and maintenance contractors. Ma'am, we've heard through unofficial channels that you're transitioning away from military-related work. Is that accurate? Sarah paused in her equipment organization to look at him directly, recognizing an opportunity to provide a different kind of education than what the assembled personnel were expecting. It's accurate, she said simply. This consultation represents my final involvement with military facilities or defense-related assignments. Is it because of how we treated you during your previous visit? Morrison asked, the question carrying the weight of young people trying to understand whether their behavior had consequences beyond immediate embarrassment. Sarah considered her response carefully, recognizing a chance to provide guidance that could influence how these pilots approached their profession and their interactions with people whose backgrounds and capabilities they didn't fully understand. No, she said, resuming her work while continuing to speak. It's because I've decided that the skills I developed in operational contexts can be better applied in different environments, and because maintaining the kind of anonymity that allows peaceful use of those skills has become impossible. She looked up from her materials to address the group directly, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had been present throughout her interactions with them, but was now unmistakable in its confidence and certainty. The most important lesson from everything that happened during my previous visit isn't about weapons employment techniques or tactical procedures. It's about understanding that every person you encounter possesses capabilities you can't see, experiences you can't imagine, and reasons for their choices that you'll never fully comprehend. The pilots gathered closer, sensing that this was the kind of instruction that wouldn't be available in any manual or classroom setting, guidance that came from perspectives they couldn't access through normal training programs or professional development opportunities. The dismissive comments you made when I first arrived here weren't malicious or unusual. They were human nature expressed through military culture. People assess others based on immediate appearances and make assumptions about capabilities based on surface indicators like job assignments and apparent responsibilities. She moved to her consultation equipment, precision instruments that reflected years of experience with complex systems that required absolute accuracy under demanding conditions. But those assumptions are wrong more often than they're right, and the cost of being wrong can be significant in ways that extend far beyond personal embarrassment or professional awkwardness. Cross, who had been observing from his position near the coordination equipment, found himself thinking about his own career and remembering situations where he had made similar assumptions about people whose quiet competence had later proved invaluable in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Ma'am," he said, "what should we have done differently during that first encounter?" Sarah looked up from her equipment, meeting his eyes directly with the kind of steady attention that suggested his question deserved a thoughtful and complete response. "You should have treated me with the same professional respect you'd show anyone else doing specialized work competently and efficiently. Not because you suspected I had hidden capabilities or exceptional background, but because respect should be your default approach until someone proves they don't deserve it." She returned to her consultation preparation, but the educational opportunity continued as she worked. The pilot who made comments about test pilots and maintenance work wasn't being deliberately malicious. He was being thoughtless. The difference matters because malice requires correction and consequences, while thoughtlessness requires education and perspective. Morrison shifted uncomfortably, recognizing himself in her description but also understanding that she was offering guidance rather than criticism, education rather than punishment. The same principle applies to everyone you'll encounter throughout your military careers and beyond. The quiet supply officer who processes your equipment requests might be a former special operations pilot who chose a support assignment after completing tours and classified programs you can't imagine. Her words were reshaping how several of the pilots thought about the support personnel they interacted with daily, people whose backgrounds and capabilities they had never considered because their current roles seemed routine or administratively focused. The civilian contractor who maintains your aircraft might have 15 years of experience keeping military equipment operational in combat zones under conditions that would challenge your understanding of what's possible. She finished her consultation setup and began the systematic process of reviewing training procedures and personnel evaluation protocols, her analysis revealing insights that came from operational experience rather than theoretical knowledge. But the deepest lesson, Sarah continued, making notes about training approaches that could be improved through better understanding of how exceptional capabilities developed, is that competence doesn't require recognition to be valuable. The most important work often happens without acknowledgement, and the people doing it prefer anonymity over visibility. She completed her consultation review and began organizing her materials for departure, signaling that her involvement with military facilities was ending exactly as she had planned. "Ma'am," Delacroix said quietly, "will we encounter you again in professional contexts?" Sarah shouldered her equipment bag and looked around at the faces that had been educated rather than humiliated. Young pilots who had learned something important about respect, assumptions, and the hidden depths that existed in everyone they encountered. "Probably not in military contexts," she said, "but you'll encounter other people who deserve the kind of respect you've learned to show. And when you do, you'll remember that competence comes in many forms, that assumptions about people's capabilities are usually incorrect, and that treating everyone with professional courtesy costs nothing but can teach you everything about leadership and human dignity." She walked toward the exit, but paused at the security checkpoint to deliver one final observation that would stay with these pilots throughout their careers. "The tactical procedures I demonstrated during my previous visit will improve your weapons employment significantly if you apply them correctly and practice them consistently. But the real gift I'm leaving you is the understanding that legends walk among you every day wearing ordinary faces and doing ordinary jobs, and that your assumptions about them reveal more about your limitations than about their capabilities." As she disappeared through the security gate, Rodriguez realized that Sarah's final consultation had accomplished something more valuable than training improvement or procedure optimization. She had provided an education in human dignity, professional respect, and the kind of wisdom that could only come from someone who had operated at exceptional levels and chosen to move beyond them, for reasons that prioritized personal peace over professional recognition. The pilots who remained behind would carry those lessons throughout their careers, approaching everyone they encountered with the kind of respectful attention that recognized hidden depths and unacknowledged competence. They would become better leaders and better people because of what they had learned about the difference between surface appearances and underlying reality. 6 months after her final consultation at Davis-Monthan, Sarah had successfully completed her transition to civilian work that had no connection to military operations or defense contracting. She had established a precision engineering consultancy that provided calibration services for scientific instruments, medical equipment, and manufacturing systems that required absolute accuracy under demanding conditions. The work was satisfying in ways that her previous assignments had never been. Technically challenging without carrying strategic implications, rewarding without requiring security clearances, and prestigious within civilian contexts without attracting the kind of attention that compromised personal privacy or operational security. Her clients valued her expertise without needing to understand the operational background that had developed it, and she was free to use her exceptional capabilities in ways that contributed to technological advancement and industrial progress without carrying responsibility for life and death outcomes. The precision she brought to civilian applications was the same that had made her legendary in military contexts, but applied to problems that improved people's lives rather than ending them. Medical equipment that saved lives through accurate diagnosis, manufacturing systems that produced safer products through precise quality control, and scientific instruments that advanced human knowledge through reliable measurement. Occasionally, she would receive messages from former colleagues or military personnel who had heard stories about her demonstration at Davis-Monthan. Most were respectful inquiries about her current work or congratulations on her successful transition to civilian applications of her skills. A few were more pressing requests from government agencies facing situations that required her specific combination of precision and experience. She declined them all politely but firmly, maintaining the boundary she had established between her operational past and her chosen future. The skills remained as sharp as ever through regular practice and application, but they were no longer available for the kind of high-stakes applications that had defined the first part of her career. The muscle memory and mental calculations that enabled exceptional performance under pressure had found new applications in civilian contexts that challenged her abilities without requiring her to carry the psychological weight of strategic responsibility. One evening, while calibrating precision manufacturing equipment for a client who produced medical devices, Sarah received a call from Rodriguez. She had tracked down Sarah's business number through professional networks that connected military and civilian aerospace industries. "Ms. Chen, I hope you don't mind me calling," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the respect that had developed during their interactions at Davis-Monthan. "I wanted you to know what's happened since your final consultation with our program." Sarah listened as Rodriguez described the changes in attitude among the pilots, the incorporation of her tactical insights into training curricula, and the broader cultural shift toward respecting support personnel and civilian contractors that had resulted from her educational interventions. "The lesson you taught has had more impact than any formal training program we've ever implemented," Rodriguez concluded. "These pilots are better leaders and more effective officers because of what they learned about recognizing competence in unexpected forms and treating everyone with the respect that acknowledges hidden capabilities." After ending the call, Sarah reflected on the unexpected legacy of her final military demonstration. She had intended to provide a simple lesson about not underestimating people based on appearances and job assignments. Instead, she had apparently catalyzed a broader understanding of respect, competence, and the hidden depths that existed in everyone. The irony wasn't lost on her that walking away from recognition had ultimately created more positive impact than years of acknowledged excellence had achieved. By choosing anonymity over visibility, she had become a more powerful example of how exceptional capabilities could be used to improve others rather than seeking personal advancement or professional recognition. Her current life offered satisfactions that her previous career had never provided. Work that challenged her abilities without compromising her values. Recognition within civilian communities that didn't require security clearances. And the simple pleasure of competence that served others without demanding strategic responsibility in return. But perhaps most importantly, it offered the knowledge that her final military demonstration had created educational effects that would benefit countless military personnel throughout their careers, teaching them to approach everyone with the kind of respectful attention that recognized hidden capabilities and honored quiet competence. As she returned to her precision calibration work, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had found the right balance between using her exceptional skills and maintaining the personal peace that made life worth living. The legend of her impossible weapons employment would continue to grow in military storytelling, inspiring respect for unassuming competence and challenging assumptions about what people were capable of achieving. But the woman who had created the legend had successfully disappeared back into the civilian world she preferred, leaving behind only the memory of precision-made routine and the enduring lesson that the most dangerous assumptions were those about people whose capabilities you couldn't see and whose experiences you couldn't imagine. And somewhere in the transition between military operations and civilian applications, she had discovered that the greatest impact sometimes came not from being recognized as exceptional, but from choosing to remain invisible while quietly changing how others approached the world around them. The story would live on in the conversations of pilots who learned to look beyond surface appearances, in the respectful treatment of support personnel who might be carrying hidden depths of experience and capability, and in the understanding that legends walked among them every day, wearing ordinary faces and asking only for the professional courtesy that should be everyone's default setting when encountering quiet competence. Sometimes the most powerful lessons were taught by people who never intended to become teachers, and sometimes the greatest legacy came from those who preferred to remain anonymous while using their exceptional capabilities to make others better at recognizing excellence in unexpected forms. Sarah Chen had achieved both, and in doing so had created a lasting impact that would outlive any official recognition or public acknowledgement. The legacy of quiet competence respected, assumptions challenged, and dignity maintained while transitioning from exceptional visibility to chosen anonymity. In the end, that was exactly the kind of legacy she had hoped to create, one that improved how people treated each other while allowing her to use her exceptional skills in ways that contributed to civilian progress rather than military outcomes, peaceful applications rather than strategic operations, and personal satisfaction rather than professional recognition. The demonstration had become legend, but the woman behind it had successfully returned to the shadows where she could continue doing exceptional work without the weight of exceptional expectations, one precise calibration at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.